think what I'll try and do is to look at mass as an idea and sort of decouple it, both in terms of its purpose, what it's trying to serve, and the forms in which we have been attempting to fulfill that purpose, and kind of open up the possibilities of looking at more than one way of looking at delivering mass. And I'll particularly talk about the form that I've been working on for the last 2 years, which is open mobility networks. Before I talk about open mobility networks, on the idea of mass itself, and I think Greg made this statement earlier that I think there's a general lack of consensus on how mass is looked at, how is it defined, or what should be mass. But if I were to take a very simple view of mass for this discussion today, for me, it's maybe at the risk of oversimplification. The idea of mass for me is to look at bringing different forms of mobility, the diverse forms of mobility. Greg spoke about demand responsive transport, micromobility, ride hailing, and a lot of them have come up as new forms of mobility in the last decade and a half. So the idea is to bring all these different forms of mobility together for the user in a manner that answers the question of how do I go from point A to point B, and then to take the user through the entire life cycle of planning, booking, payments, etc., in a manner that is agnostic of any particular form and kind of convenient through various offerings that are available. Now, obviously, this looks like a very straightforward idea, logical, and easy to do, but clearly it's easier said than done because it's confronted with the realities in which we deliver mobility services digitally today. Now, if you look at the way digital services are delivered today, and of course, one of the realities is the sheer diversity of forms that we are seeing today. Each of the mobility operators have their own ways of offering services. Their offerings are quite varied and disparate. They have their own way of engaging with the user across the order life cycle. That kind of makes all these mobility forms disparate and kind of very complex to bring them all together as one integrated mobility service. Now that's one, but I think more importantly on the model of service delivery itself, and it's true not just for mobility, but for e-commerce in general, whether it's retail commerce, logistics, food delivery, travel and stay. I think the challenge is with the premise with which the digital service delivery models are built. Now, if you look at all the service providers, whether in mobility or others, it built on this premise that both the buyer and the seller, the consumer and the provider need to be on the same platform to have any meaningful interactions digitally. Now, this kind of makes each platform acquire the user on their own online and try to solve for their problem independently working in silos. Now, mobility as such is a very complex population scale problem that's constantly evolving. So it takes everybody to come together and solve for that problem for that particular user. Now, one of the methods of solving for this was to bring all these different mobility service providers together onto another platform, what we call as MaaS as a central platform, and then try to onboard users on top of it. Now, this obviously has the same inherent premise as the individual platforms, which is to bring all providers onto one platform and then bring users onto the same platform to have any kind of integrated service offering interactions between the user and the providers. Now, this central model has the issue of alignment of incentives between that of the providers, of the intermediary, and that of the users. And outside of mobility, this model of aggregation is coming under severe scrutiny, whether it's in e-commerce, food delivery, etc., across the world. So we were trying looking at what could be a different model or a different form by which we can deliver this idea of MaaS for a city or for a region. And that's when we stumbled upon this idea of open networks. Now, in an open network, what we are looking at is a way to allow users to be on any platform of their choice as a consumer app. It could be their everyday app like a chat messenger, payment app, or even a browser or a virtual assistant. Give them the choice to discover mobility services at their place of convenience online, and allow each of the provider platforms to kind of independently make themselves discoverable at their own command. They maintain the inventory. They don't have to do any heavy one-to-one integrations with all the buyer platforms out there, and not have to sign complex contracts, commercial contracts, but be able to publish their catalog of offerings onto a network and be naturally discoverable at their own command, at their own terms of doing business. So this idea of a decentralized network is one of the models that we've been working on. It fundamentally enables choice on both ends and takes away the need of any kind of a central aggregation that may be required, and allows for organic expansion with every provider coming on board and buyers having infinite choice on the other side to discover any service provider that's available on the network. So this, I think, fundamentally shifts the narrative from looking at marketplaces, whether it's a mass as a mobility marketplace or in general for commerce as a marketplace, kind of shifts the paradigm from a very platform-centric, two-sided marketplace to a more open network-central marketplace. Now, the idea of open network itself is not something new or radical. I think we do have a lot of open networks all around us. Today, the internet is, of course, the biggest one, the World Wide Web. And I think something closer to this idea of mobility is the email network itself. I mean, if you look at emails, right from its origin, the buyer, the sender and the receiver were on two different platforms exchanging emails. All you need is a compatible email ID where you can send mails to a person anywhere across the planet, and you don't even ask for which platform the other person is using. It makes it completely interoperable. And the reason that it's possible is because the two email platforms are able to talk to each other on the content of, on the structure and format of email communication using this open protocol called SMTP, or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Now, I'm sure you must be thinking that I think email is fairly simple. It's just a bunch of text messages and attachments. But I think mobility and commerce could be quite complex. I agree with you. I think mobility is fairly nuanced. But I think when we explored this path of finding a similar approach, obviously we required a protocol that allows for two business machines to interact with each other from the buyer side and the seller side and understand the language of commerce, understand the language of mobility. And that's how we arrived at Beckn as a protocol, one of its kind protocol today, which allows for this interaction to happen and look at mobility as a service, as an open network, as a distributed open network, a network without a center, where the network itself acts as a public digital infrastructure on which anybody can onboard users from one side, the providers from the other side, and they can mutually discover each other and engage in conversations in order life cycle and making booking, whether it's a single journey or a multimodal journey. All those possibilities exist. Now, it clearly makes interoperability as a way of integration, because interoperability, as I said earlier, fundamentally enables choice. And for interoperability, you need a common language which both the sides can understand, and it's agnostic of any particular form of mobility. And that's what I think Beckn protocol is trying to do. It's compatible with transit systems, micromobility, demand responsive transit, and even future flexible. I mean, if you have urban aviation tomorrow, mobility, I think we have made it agnostic of any particular form and understand mobility fundamentally and commerce fundamentally. And that's what Beckn protocol does, and allows this organic expansion of network where different providers can come on board and start engaging with each other. It allows you to play out the entire order lifecycle. Each provider can publish its catalog, its own terms. We heard, Paul, about the different revenue models that they're looking at for particular forms of operators. It allows for that autonomy with the operator to play out their different revenue models, pricing models across the order lifecycle, and allow for the users to discover these offerings on a third-party platform and combine this with any other operator and have a wholesome multimodal journey possible. Now, clearly, this network has no central intermediary or a integrator or a central platform as such. It all happens in a very distributed manner. And I think one thing that this network recognizes is to not try to standardize every offering of different forms of mobility, the diverse forms of mobility, and make it like one standard template. Instead, it recognizes diversity and allows for each operator to have its own, pricing model in terms of doing business, to kind of publish its catalog as per its own terms and make it discoverable and usable for the user to book a journey. Now, obviously, Beckn protocol, you need a protocol to have an open network, and Beckn protocol is that. Just to be sure, when I say protocol, is just a set of specifications, a virtual document of standards and specification. It's not a software or a platform or any runtime infrastructure of any kind. It exists because there was probably none such before, which combines all forms of mobility with one universal specifications, and also can extend itself to mobility and other forms of commerce. Again, protocol is not just a data structure or just a data sharing specification. It's a wholesome transaction protocol and it allows for commercial transactions, for order booking, price discovery. All of that happen over the network using this protocol. The protocol is just a standard, does not endorse any particular form of technology. Today, we have a network live on World Wide Web. You can implement this network should you decide to go the blockchain way. It's possible to implement that. It doesn't impose any technology constraints on the providers and the buyer platforms. There can be any form of technology yet connecting to an interoperable network. And protocol today, as it's evolved to version 0.9, it caters to not just to mobility, but to retail, urban local delivery, urban logistics, tourism and stay, healthcare, etc. Now, this idea has come to life in one of the cities in India, Kochi, a southern in India city. Today, we have this network live since June 23rd, and it has 5 different taxi associations operating independently, bringing their own inventory online onto this network and being discoverable on a consumer app. And the consumer app does the whole service discovery, service integration, pricing discovery, etc. on as an independent platform. And soon we will have the metro, the local metro, the water ferry network, the auto rickshaw associations, all coming in, and even bike sharing, bicycle sharing, micromobility options also joining this network to make all of them be discoverable on a third-party platform. And given the open network nature, it allows for some of the popular consumer platforms like the Google Map, WhatsApp, and some of the prominent payment apps in India to also get onto the network and offer an integrated service delivery experience for mobility, and not just force the customer, the citizens in Kochi, to just use one particular app. So it allows for what I call the innovations at the edges. It allows for different kinds of service bundling experience, not just in mobility, but mobility combined with other offerings outside of mobility. And that's an innovation that the private sector can bring in on this digital infrastructure of an open network. The open network in Kochi is managed by the local transport authority, KMTA, which oversees the network. It kind of helps, they kind of are building policies to a minimal set of rules to govern this network, and these policies are programmed and baked into the network digitally. So there are machine readable policies that will allow for equality of access, being it inclusive, having some kind of a network fee tariff structure that is amenable to all participants. So all of that is something that KMT is able to do with a network infrastructure through Beckn protocol, and kind of make the network itself self-sustainable in terms of recovering whatever little investments it takes. There's hardly any investment in setting up a network. Most of them are private sector investments. The government doesn't really invest anything in this. Even those little nodes like the gateways and the registries could be a private sector investment for them to make their own little high volume, low value kind of transaction business out of this, just like some of the payment networks we see across the world. It allows for a business opportunity for even some of these nodes to be operated by individual private sector players, so that it kind of works like a self-sustainable economy by itself. So it allows for KMTA to now expand this to other forms, not just looking at mobility, but extend itself to parking, EV charging stations. They're looking at urban logistics and hospitality, all coming together on one single network. And without having to do much in terms of bringing them together, all it is asking the private operators, the public and private operators, is to just implement the Beckn protocol specifications so that we can have a network going between all of them as one network ecosystem. Now, because of the universal nature of the protocol, what we are looking at is to integrate mobility deep into the local economy. Given it's one network, it's possible to bring a local retail network, a delivery and tourism network onto this that can drive more business opportunities for the open mobility network, and it kind of create this combinatorial innovations, whether it's on revenue models, pricing models, non-fare revenue generation, and things like those. And that's a possibility. This is one other network that we're doing in Bangalore, another city, which is nothing to do with mobility, but it looks at local retail, the kirana stores, the local mom and pop stores and restaurants coming together as a network, being discoverable on third-party platforms like Google Pay. And then you're connecting to a delivery network, which is all the hyper-local delivery companies coming together as another network, combining to create a network of networks, again with the same Beckn protocol. Now, it's very easy for a Bangalore mobility operators to connect to this network and bring mobility on top of this. So that's the possibilities we are looking at. Now, clearly, if there is no central structure, central platform governing the network, how does the protocol manage this? The protocol allows for natural expansion, governance through dynamic machine readable policies, builds trust in the commercial transactions through smart contracts, through dual digital signatures, and allows for universal discovery and democratizing access. So protocol has these capabilities. We'd like to talk about that later in the discussion, but these are the possibilities that we have managed to do as Beckn Foundation. And to Greg's question, foundation, pretty much only a design company. We are a not-for-profit company just designing the specifications. We are nowhere a network participant by ourselves. It's pretty much a philanthropic effort that I've been working on for the last 3 years, along with my co-founders. And the idea is to kind of build an open community so we are not the only authors today of Beckn protocol. We have several other companies joining the open community and taking this protocol evolution ahead. And so that's one of the perspectives I thought I'll share in today's discussion. Thank you.